Happy New Year. Wednesday, January 1st, 2025. It is a new year. I'm reading new things. If you watched last week's reading vlog, you're aware that I ended 2024 on a sour note. I read a book that was so disappointing that it put me in a reading slump for all of 12 hours because the year was over. I'm leaving that negative energy in 2024. 2025 is going to be a great reading year. And this week, I'm starting off my 2025 reading journey by reading Sledge versus the Labyrinth, which was pitched to me as a modern day Conan the Barbarian. I Sometimes I just want to read something, turn my brain off, enjoy some good old fashioned mano y mano macho violence. And I think Sledge versus the Labyrinth is that story. It's a story where I could turn my brain off. I could just be immersed, follow a cool bad A character fighting bad guys with a giant sledgehammer. What more can you want? There are way worse ways to pass the time. One thing I really like about Sledge vs. the Labyrinth so far, I'm only 20 pages in, but it reads like an 80s action movie. We're following Sledge. He's hunting down the Labyrinth, which is like this criminal syndicate of individuals who hurt innocent people for money. And he's like bumping into friends in this town. And it's like, oh yeah, this is the guy that tried to kill me, but now we're best buddies. I trust him with my life. No other context given, no other exposition, and I love it. One of the great things about 80s movies is that when you watch them and you didn't try to think about them, it was just cool. It's like, oh yeah, they were enemies and now they're best friends. He tried to kill him last month, but now they're buddies. I love it. No context needed. I think I think this is going to be a very fun, wild reading week. On the manga front, I am starting Vinland Saga. It's a Viking manga about an individual who I believe, from my understanding, is an angry young man who is talented in the ways of war. And I think the story is supposed to end with him becoming a pacifist. That's like how I think that's going to be alluded to rather shortly. Vinland Saga is one of the great Bermuda Triangles of the manga world. It has been going on for so long, but the author has finally announced that the series is going to end relatively soon, probably in 2025. So now is the perfect time to dive into it. I love Vikings. I love like bad A individuals fighting criminals with sledgehammers. I think this week's going to be a very enjoyable reading week. But what is the moral I'm getting from both these reads so far? Violence is always the answer, or rather, violence is always a answer. When you boil it down, when everything boils down, you could solve almost any issue in the world with some violence. And that's what our heroes are doing in both these reads. Thursday, January 2nd, day 2 of 2025. I have finished the first short story of the year, The Miracles of Jamie by Ray Bradbury. I read 9 or 10 Ray Bradbury short stories in 2024. I love his writing. He has such beautiful, thoughtful, adaptable prose. Like, I've been reading through some of his short story collections, like bouncing between different eras of his career. His writing style goes through several crazy metamorphoses, and it's really cool to see how much of a range that Ray Bradbury had. He really could write any type of story. The Miracles of Jamie perfectly captures the the universal stage that a bunch of us go through when we're younger. I'm not sure if you did this, but I know I did this. You're walking down the street and like you have this wish, you have this prayer in your heart, you have this something that you want to happen. And then you're like, well, if I make it to that light pole before a car passes me, then that thing is going to happen. And then you make it there and you're like, okay, awesome. Good news. Good things are happening. That's a good omen. I know I'm not the only person that did that. And Ray Bradbury's telling the story of Jamie, a young man who believes that he can perform miracles because he's believing so strongly and he's doing what he's supposed to do. He's bargaining with a higher power to make these miracles happen. And it's a very good short story. It talks about a lot of really universal things that we all experience. And it goes through the entire emotional spectrum. It's very impressive. Definitely give that short story a try. The Miracles of Jamie. I am reading Sledge versus the Labyrinth, and one thought I was having while reading it was we all want to be that person, like the only person that could do a specific thing. You know, maybe you're romantically interested in somebody and like you want this love story. You want to be the only person that can win over that individual. When you're like working in your career, you have your job. You want to be the only person that could do this special thing. You want to be the hero. We all want to do something special, something that nobody else has done before. And Sledge vs. the Labyrinth is really reminding me of why I thought so many of those heroes from the 80s action movies were so awesome, and it's because they were doing things I had never seen before. And I think that's one reason why a lot of action films in the present day just don't hit the same. Because all the action sequences, all the amazing scenes, all the fights, choreographed fighting scenes, they've all been done before. The magic is gone. But it's kind of cool to be reading something kind of a little bit more lowbrow. Just mindless escapism, just a fun time in Sledge vs. the Labyrinth. He is such a bad A character. He has such a powerful aura. He's just awesome. He's just Sledge. He's a 6'7" behemoth of a man with a sledgehammer, and everyone around him knows it. He is that guy. And I think deep down, men and women, we want to be that guy, or that girl, or that person. And that's very relatable. Saturday, I read another short story by Ray Bradbury, Henry the Ninth, and it's kind of a silly short story. One of the good things about reading short stories is that you don't have to resonate very strongly with it, and if you don't like it, you only put 15, 20, 30 minutes down the drain. And Henry the Ninth is one such short story. It tells the story of a man who is deciding to be the last man remaining in Great Britain. In this world, in this setting, all of the humans from the northern countries, mostly in Europe, have decided to travel to the warmer, more, pleasant climates of the world, like Jamaica, California, places in the more southern part. So it's not like it's not a post-apocalyptic situation. There's no war. There's no great disease that's causing this mass exodus. They're decided to leave because they don't like the weather of England. And I can relate. When I was in London, did not care for the weather. So yes, very silly short story from Ray Bradbury. It really makes you think about like what is the most important part of a civilization, the people or the culture and the history. And it really does an interesting way. It has an interesting way of putting a spotlight on that fact. Like, is Great Britain without the people? And are the people the Britons without living in Great Britain? So interesting thoughts like that. Read it in like 30 minutes. And yeah, probably my second least favorite Ray Bradbury short story. Dear Santa is still my least favorite. On the manga front, Vinland Saga, I've read 4 chapters. It's just okay so far. I expect it's hundreds of chapters long. I don't expect it to be great right away. We are still very much in the prologue. One trope, one very common thing that is prevalent in manga, especially mangas that star a young adult or teenage protagonist, is the overpowered teenager. The teenager that's such a bad A, they're stronger, more powerful, better fighters than almost every adult. It's super unbelievable, especially as someone that, a lifelong athlete, a lifelong martial artist. It bugs me, okay? I know it's escapism. I know it's not supposed to bug other people. It doesn't bug other people as much as me, but I don't like that. So I'm reading Sledge vs. the Labyrinth, and one thing I've noticed about the characterization in this book that is very similar to many of the action movies I grew up watching is that writers from that time period, like directors and writers of movies, and the author of this book did something that's very rare in literature now. They are replacing characterization and a character arc with just lore and exposition about said character. Like, what I mean is, instead of our character going on this journey and becoming someone different at the end, our character plants their feet in the metaphorical sand, and the reader goes on this journey, and our opinions about the character change, even if that character does not. And it's very reminiscent of one of my favorite books of all time, A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman. Because at the start of A Man Called Ove, you're following an old man, he's very grumpy, and he has no friends, no family left, and he's isolated and alone. And you don't like him. But as you learn more details about his life, you go on this journey. And then your opinion about the character changes. And I love when an author can pull that off. I'm still waiting to see if the author of this book is going to pull that off, but if he does, that is something that I find very interesting, very compelling. It's a very interesting way to go about characterization because lore and aura can replace a character arc as long as it's done well. Because right now, our character is going through no changes, but I'm figuring out more things about his backstory, and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. This guy ain't changing. Monday night. I'm 70% through Sledge vs. the Labyrinth, and I've run into something that I find troubling, and I think a lot of authors can learn from this. Our author played basketball professionally for 10 years. He played in America, he played in New Zealand. It's safe to say he has spent a lot of time around black people. But when we encounter a black character, a black supporting character, 50% through the narrative of this story, the speech, the way the black characters talk in this book is such a caricature. I'm not one to get offended. I think it's funny. Like, I find it flattering when people try to depict my culture, even though I don't talk in the traditional West Coast African American vernacular. But the black people in this book speak like no black people I've ever encountered in my life. There is one sentence where a black woman from my generation says, "Don't worry, sugar. You got two super fly sugar mamas looking out for you. We got you, baby." And as much as I wished black women talked like that from my generation, they don't. The world would be a better place if they did. So I think it's very interesting that one of the first things the black character says in this book is the N-word. And it kind of gives off the feeling that like the authors always wanted to write that down, and he finally had the opportunity with a black character. Not offended. It's really funny. It's very humorous, but probably done in bad taste. That being said, this reads very much like an 80s action movie, and that's very much on brand for that feel, for that atmosphere, for what the author is trying to depict in this story. But a lot of people run into that, and they'll be like, that's problematic. I love it. I think it's humorous, and I think it's quite charming. Tuesday, January 7th, I finished Sledge versus the Labyrinth. And I have a lot of conflicting emotions about this. Let me start off with the positives because I think you should always spotlight the positives before you talk about the negatives of a work of art. The action scenes were really enjoyable. I generally don't care too much for action scenes because, I've been involved in martial arts my entire life. So I generally feel like authors either over-explain action scenes or under-explain action scenes. And I generally prefer if the authors under-explain and talk about combat in more vague terms. But the author of this book did a very good job at describing the action in a way that was very easy to imagine and very immersive and very enjoyable. A lot of times action scenes are clunky. Our author did not do that. Sledge is a very funny, likable protagonist at times, but he's an anti-hero. You're not supposed to like every aspect of his personality. And I found Sledge, even though he wasn't, there was no character arcs to speak of, but the lore of our protagonist was really kind of bad. He grew in fame and power in the fighting pits in the gulags of Russia. He was a professional basketball player, one of the best basketball players of all time, one of the great defensive players. And now he's just a guy that beats up bad guys with a sledgehammer. What's not to like? Some people would find Sledge to be a problematic protagonist, and that's why they would not enjoy this book. But I enjoyed that part of the book. The parts I did not enjoy, and I want to make sure to give plenty of background information about why I did not enjoy these parts. I was talking yesterday or the day before about how the author's depiction of black characters seemed a little bit like caricatures, and that it was mildly offensive, but I found it charming because I'm of the belief that if you're trying to depict characters of color, even if they're not perfect depictions, you get credit for that because you're trying. It's charming, it's flattering that you're trying to involve persons of colors in your narratives. But the black characters became more and more like caricatures. Their behaviors and their actions and their dialogue became more problematic. And that was quite troubling. I'm not one to try to make assumptions about an author's personal beliefs, because It's art. It is separate from the author. But I am surprised that a person that played basketball his entire life did not have a black friend go over this book and be like, yeah, this might be a little problematic. Maybe clean this up a little bit. The author seemingly did not seem interested in doing that. And that's very interesting. I think it's a very interesting mistake. And I think as this book grows in popularity, because I'm seeing a lot more people talk about Sledge versus the Labyrinth, you're going to run into some people that are from, more diverse backgrounds. And they're going to be like, yo, this is offensive. Because I read plenty of old works. I read Stephen King. Stephen King uses the N-word, hard R, in all of his books at least once. Not offensive. It makes sense. Some characters are racist. Okay? And that's okay. You could have racist characters in your books. Does not make the author racist. I don't find that problematic whatsoever. I'm going to read H.P. Lovecraft, a very racist author. I don't care. But I do think that our author was trying to capture the magic of 80s action movies. And he was able to capture all of that, as well as some of the racial insensitivities from 45 years ago. But it's more problematic in this book because it does not take place in the 1980s. It takes place in the modern day. And I find the depiction to be quite troubling. And I'm surprised that if he had an editor, that they didn't try to kind of steer him away from that. And if the author's one of those authors who takes a stand, where he's like, yo, if this book offends you, it's not for you. Don't be a Karen. Don't complain. Don't be like a lefty. That's cool. That is completely valid. You could have that opinion as an author. I don't support that, though. Not even as a lefty, not as someone that gets offended by racial or slight racial insensitivities or slightly ignorant depictions of different groups of people. I generally am able to overlook that. But I do find it very troubling that no one mentioned those aspects of Sledge, because I'm seeing several people talk about it on BookTube, but I have not seen anybody mention that. And that is very... So I'll be the one to say, there's some racially insensitive depictions in this book. And, yeah, I'll just end it off on that. I gave this book 2 stars. It would have been 1 star if I did not enjoy myself so much for the first 80%. I will not be picking up the series moving forward, most likely. But yes, quite interesting. If I would have read this book last year, it might have ended up being my least favorite book of 2024. If you guys watched the vlog from last week, I read The Raven Tower by Ann Leckie, and I absolutely hated that book. It was held in very high acclaim, and I did not enjoy it. This book, several booktubers were talking about it, and they had very high opinions of it, and I had high hopes for it. And I'm starting off 2025 with a book that very much underperformed in terms of being enjoyable and being something that I would want to recommend to other people. If you're looking for, 80s action movie type books, and you're not someone that will be put off by racially insensitive or, just perhaps, slightly ignorant depictions of people of color, then this book is for you. If you are someone that's going to be a Karen and be frustrated and annoyed by that, this book is not for you. This book was not for me. I guess I'm a Karen this week. I read a few chapters of Vinland Saga, and I liked it. I finished 2 short stories by Ray Bradbury. I liked one of them. I had a completely lukewarm reaction to the second one, Henry the Ninth. And then I really liked the Miracles of Jamie. So, a mixed first week of 2025. But I'm very hopeful for the rest of the year. I think starting off the year with a dud of a read is kind of a good spot to be in, honestly, because I can only go up from here. So yeah, a lot to think about for this week's reading vlog. And this is a reading vlog where I read and I think about things, and I share my thoughts with you. So yeah, kind of a lame reading week. Very much a letdown. But that's one book off of my list of 25 books to read in 2025. I didn't care for it, so positive about how the future is looking. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.